Welcome over to the Week 15 edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast. Of course, the Waiver Wire crew here, Joe Bartel and Jake Letarski, getting you set for playoff scheduling here, playoff programming, and obviously a number of running back names in particular that we might want to discuss and figure out who can help your roster. I don't know if there's the Justin Jackson from 2 years ago who fills in for Austin Eckler and wins everyone a playoff game level of backup, but there certainly are a few interesting ones that if you were in a pinch could be considered. We'll get to those guys and the receivers as well, and maybe even a quarterback that I'm going to personally recommend and take over a few of the guys, and we'll talk about them here in a second. Let's hit the music. Again, welcome over to the Tuesday edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast, the Waiver Wire postseason edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast, and the I'm depressed because the Packers lost edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast. I'm Joe Bartel. You can follow me at JB Fantasy Sports on Twitter. Alongside me every week, Jake Letarski at RotoJake. How'd you do in your leagues? I saw you were at least at the Invitational. You're making the playoffs for that one.
Yeah. I played a guy who I thought had an amazing team and ended up just doing awesome. I guess DeAndre Hopkins finally having a big game in the, I had so much of him this year, and in the week that I needed it most, he really came through for me. And a couple of Lamar leagues. I think I'm in the playoffs of 4 or 6 that I'm really keeping track of seriously. So I'm very happy. There was a situation though where 2 spots were very much in limbo. I needed to have one other team lose and then outscore my brother by 60, and it all fell into place. Like, there were times where I was out of the playoffs in both leagues, in the playoffs in both leagues. It was a pendulum, one or another, all night. So watching football last night, while I am depressed about the Packers, it was an exciting night of football.
Not only did the Packers play horribly, everyone did. No, that was just bad. And Joe Barry's, once again, one of the worst coordinators in the league. This was the worst fantasy.
One of the? You mean the, right?
Yeah, you could. Okay. Yeah, the for sure.
Now that Matt Canada's gone, I don't like to hate on my old Badger, but yeah.
This was the worst fantasy week I've had in a long time. Stake league, I scored like 83 points. A few of my leagues, I had an opportunity to get a bye week. Only scored 80 in those and got like double upped on a few of them. I have so much Mike Evans. I have a lot of Justin Jefferson, CJ Stroud as well. Like it couldn't have been a better accumulation of all guys that have been good this year and then just stunk the joint up. A few of them I had a chance to make the playoffs if X, Y, and Z happened. Completely went the other way. So it sounds like you are fortuitous, Jake. And hopefully the listeners will be. I still made, I think, the playoffs in 7 or 8 of my 15, but it could have been way more, and I was anticipating way more. If you did make the playoffs, though, I think the waiver wire list this week really benefits you if you need running backs. You and I differ on the top one, and I guess I'll say I'm going off the information that I'm kind of gleaning on the Thursday night game between the Raiders and Chargers. I think Zamir White is the top pickup this week. Josh Jacobs did not practice yesterday. Of course, nobody practiced on Mondays in these games. It's an estimated report. But he left last week's game with that knee injury, didn't return. And if you are looking at the strength of the schedule, I guess we're looking at the schedule overall for the Raiders, do you really want to play Jacobs? I mean, is that the point? Like, I think you should be trying to see what you have in Zamir White. Let's just say if Jacobs does not play, which right now we don't know, and of course we're recording this early afternoon Tuesday, more information might come out after the podcast. If he doesn't play Thursday, it's Zamir Abdullah and Zamir White.
Yep.
And I think Zamir White gets a ton of work against the Chargers. Like that, I made the mistake last week not playing Ezekiel Elliott because I was worried about that Steelers defense and didn't know what the Patriots offense would look like.
Oh, no.
I'm not making that mistake again. I think Zamir White is going to be the critical focal point. He's the one they have draft pick capital invested in if Jacobs misses time.
Yeah, so, I mean, I agree with your logic, and I also agree that if Jacobs misses the game, that Zamir White is going to be the back to own. Yes, Amir Abdullah will cut into his workload, especially on the passing downs. Zamir White's kind of the bigger back. You would expect him to get, between the tackles and the goal line work there. But I'm not confident enough to actually even put him in my top 5. I actually stuck him out there as an honorable mention. The reason being, I've seen this song and dance before, right, where how many shows have we done this year where a player gets hurt in the Sunday game? We don't quite have the full – I mean, this is a practice estimate, right, because of the Thursday night game. We don't quite have the full story later on in the week to end up coming back and being fine. Now, also Josh Jacobs, his absence that he did not return from was originally attributed to a knee injury. On Monday's practice estimate, he was actually listed with a quad injury. So I don't know if that's better or worse in any sense. And also remember, Josh Jacobs is on a 1-year deal too. So what are the Raiders really everybody's in the hunt, right? 30 of 32 teams can still make the playoffs. So I could see them throwing Josh Jacobs out there and this being fine. Obviously, Zamir White is worth a bid if because he's going to be out there just about everywhere. I mean, what do I have? He's only rostered in 2% of formats,
Right.
and that's probably because of the first come first serve leagues that went ahead and grabbed him, picked him up right away. But I actually left him just outside of my top 5 here. But I think your next pickup and my number 1 we can probably agree on.
Yeah, and the assumption for a lot of people, number 1 overall guy is going to be Ty Chandler with Alexander Madison likely missing time due to a high ankle sprain. And we say likely because we thought the same thing for Trevor Lawrence, and then he plays 6 days later. I officially don't trust anybody in the NFL when it comes to talking about high ankle sprains and what that actually means and can they play. Theoretically, for a running back, they should not be out there. So Ty Chandler enters as the starting running back for the Vikings. They have a pretty good matchup in their own right here against the Bengals, although the Bengals defense looking pretty good too as of late. I know in the chat we're talking about Amir Abdullah eating into Zamir White's workload. Theoretically, nobody does that for the Vikings, but Ty Chandler isn't utilized as a receiving threat all that often in instances like we've seen before. I know he was cutting into Madison's workload. I don't think that's because it's Chandler, and his yards per carry is just over 4, and that accounts for one game where he had like a 50-yard run. I don't think Ty Chandler is all that good of a running back, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings use a number of hands this week.
Yeah, so this is interesting here because I agree with you in a sense where like you could easily throw Ty Chandler out there. He could end up with 18 carries for 45 yards, no touchdowns, and that's his game, right? That could be the case, but I will take those touches because I do think they are a bit more secure. I mean, Madison with a high ankle sprain. To me, that seems a little bit more serious than the Jacobs thing, but, we're just going to have to wait and see here throughout the week, and chances are you'll have to make this decision with, the Jacobs replacement options coming on Thursday night. But, no, I put Chandler number 1 because there is no real competition there. There is a little bit of, there's quarterback controversy in Minnesota now. I've got Nick Mullins, Josh Dobbs. What's going to happen here? But the Bengals defense is very middle of the pack against opposing running backs. They can be got, I guess we could say, even by below average quarterbacks. So Chandler, I'm just taking number 1 based on the opportunity.
Yeah, that's fair. And it's going to be a safer situation for the carries specifically that he'll be getting. Like, it's not like Kenny Nwangu is going to be doing all that much. I just don't think Ty Chandler operates all that well, and the Vikings offense might struggle. So 18 for 45, great. That's still 4.5 points. I bet you Zamir White can get that on 3 carries against this Chargers defense, specifically against the run. We'll see. I mean, I think it becomes a much easier answer come Thursday. But because there is little information, less teams theoretically overall bidding on these guys, you might be able to have Zamir White completely sneak through waivers, whereas you probably have to focus on Ty Chandler, given all the talk about him being the top waiver pickup for a lot of people. We had a question in the chat about quarterbacks, and I think it's interesting because Jake Browning made my top list at number 3 and yours at number 4. But it was referring to Max Duggan and also Easton Stick. So the news of the day was Justin Herbert placed in injured reserve, out for the rest of the season after undergoing surgery to a finger on his throwing hand. If you recall, Max Duggan, the quarterback for TCU last year when they improbably made it to the championship of the college playoffs and then got obliterated, was a 7th-round draft pick by the Chargers this season. He's been on the practice squad a while, so you won't see him when you're looking at Chargers rosters. But theoretically, Duggan would get recalled. He would get called up. But I think Easton Stick, so he's 28 years old, right? Like
he's been there 5 years. People don't realize
and he's
that.
played 2 games in 5 years. Like if the Chargers have,
and his second game was on Sunday.
Yes,
he had one appearance. He over 5 years he attempted 1 pass.
If the Chargers have chose to keep Easton Stick around this long, I don't believe it's because they're going to give Max Duggan then the opportunity right when they need to. Maybe later in the season, and this person was asking, do you stash them in hopes for later in the year? If Duggan is playing later in the year, I think they're going to be so decimated weapon-wise that it's not going to be helpful in any situation. So
I'm just curious what kind of 20-team 2-quarterback league where this question's coming up.
I mean, Jake,
I really want to know the
backup court. We just watched a guy that does weird hand gestures and has an Italian mobster as an agent dominate Joe Barry's Packer defense. Any third-string quarterback actually could be relevant this season, especially Max Duggan, who looked capable last year. But I'm concerned, I would say, if we're really having to go down to that point. But Jake Browning absolutely is in consideration. I had this conversation with Harry Thompson, one of our chief tech guys, but also just brilliant fantasy mind and smarter than me way too often. I want to play Jake Browning over Tua, who's going against the Jets, and I want to play Jake Browning over Kyler Murray, who goes against the 49ers.
I want to play Jake Browning over Dak Prescott this week.
You're playing Jake Browning over the MVP, Dak Prescott?
No, I don't know about that, but I've thought about it. He outscored him this past week, and has not
So
not the week before. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, I put him up there a lot. I got him for cheap in the Dynasty League, and I'm really hoping that he can, earn himself a contract somewhere else where he can play and excel. But the thing with Jake Browning, I had him as number 4 on my pickup list, on my priority ads this week, and if a quarterback is even remotely good, that offense just has so many weapons, and they're all finally healthy. And there's opportunity to excel if you can just get the ball to your playmakers, and that's what Jake Browning's been doing. And I've fallen in love with what I've seen over the last couple of weeks, and he definitely gets he's right up there into maybe even the top 15 this week.
I think I'm going to do it. I obviously a couple days games for people who are in the playoffs. There's 3 games Saturday, so just be mindful if you are kind of lingering or tinkering with your lineups. Make the decision by Saturday, since that'll be much more difficult. But I think Jake Browning will be my starting quarterback. That there also is a streaming option in Joe Flacco that I think is totally favorable too. Is interesting. And we'll talk about Flacco later.
Of course, the quarterback section is going to be full this week. We don't want to do it in our top 5 here, but there's a lot, with Herbert out, and there's a lot of flux going on here, so it's definitely going to be an interesting set there here. But I want to get to Jake Browning's teammate, our cover boy, Chase Brown. I had him as my number 2 pickup. He's only 7% rostered. He was a guy that we were both on very heavily in the preseason, if you remember. We both liked him a lot in the preseason, and then he got hurt. And he was on IR, I believe, and he just didn't play. Travion Williams was active over him many, many weeks in a row. Suddenly, he's active, he's playing, he's getting the ball, and he's making huge plays. He took a 54-yard screen pass to the house this week. He's getting season highs in touches. Now, make no mistake, Joe Mixon is still your lead back there, but Chase Brown is someone that has a bit of standalone value, arguably just as much as someone like Ty Chandler in half of the opportunities, less than half of the opportunities. It's almost like that Keaton Mitchell effect, right? Where he's not going to get a ton of carries or touches, but he's definitely going to make the most of them. And if anything were to happen to Joe Mixon, suddenly Chase Brown becomes a top 15 back week in and week out for your fantasy playoffs, and then would be that league winner. So you have standalone value there, which makes him worth a stash even if you don't need to start him. You would dump all your FAAB on him if you're a Mixon owner, just to be safe, right? And you have high expectations for Brown the rest of the season, I believe. Even maybe not high expectations, but just there's a steady baseline here with the touches that he's getting, and it's working for the Cincinnati offense.
He is the top pickup if you have Joe Mixon. He is also the top pickup if you are kind of planning and you have 4 or 5 deep at running back. I would much rather have Ty Chandler and Zamir White over Chase Brown if I'm needing running backs and I'm looking at these guys. And I don't even think it's much of a debate to me. We talk about the standalone values of flex play. It was a 48-yard touchdown where you and I probably could have ran at least 30 of those yards. There was no defense in sight. Literally on the TV screen, you could until the very final one, and it kind of jukes out at the end. That's just a blown play. And if we're saying 95% of the yards and the touchdown and the fantasy points come off a broken play, and that's half of what he's total over the past 2 weeks, that's not standalone fantasy value to me. I value him as a backup. I completely understand that. But Ty Chandler and Zamir White, I think both are in a better spot. And I think Zamir, even rest of season, if the Raiders eventually do get ruled out, would be an interesting case. Just to go on talent, though, for Chase Brown, if Chase Brown was the starting running back for the Vikings, if we flip them around, Ty Chandler is not doing any of that for the Bengals, but Chase Brown would be like a 130 yards
100%.
and a better – I truly believe in the talent. I think it's very clear when he touches the ball, but it is not a Keaton Mitchell situation to me. Mitchell gets involved often. There isn't a stud in front of him. In the case of Joe Mixon, who, by the way, 25 fantasy points in back-to-back weeks, even with Jake Browning, he's had a totally good game. Keaton Mitchell splitting time with Gus Edwards and Justice Hill. That by default, you want to get Keaton.
I think Hill's kind of out of that mix now, but anyway, no. Chase Brown did have 30% of the snaps though, so that's not nothing. And he ran 6 routes and carried the ball 8 times, and of course Mixon carried the ball 21 times. But it's 11 of the 37 running back opportunities, and of course that's amplified by the big touchdown here. But he's somebody that I think they'll continue to use as a change of pace and potentially be useful. He's the top pickup if you don't necessarily need to start someone this week and are just trying to make your roster the best available. If you're not going to stash multiple defenses or whatnot or anything like that. But if you need someone to actually fill in as a flex this week, then yeah, you're probably looking to Ty Chandler or possibly White, depending on the Jacobs injury status.
Yeah, another guy that made our top 5 list is Zay Jones, of course, the receiver for the Jaguars. And Christian Kirk was predictably placed in injured reserve earlier last week. What was not predictable was Trevor Lawrence playing 6 days later on a high ankle sprain, or maybe not actually a high ankle sprain, and looking pretty darn good. And it was obviously Calvin Ridley that drew a lot of targets. Evan Ingram had a monster game. But we're not talking about back-to-back weeks where Zay Jones, pretty critical factor for that passing attack. And Jacksonville's schedule gets a little bit easier here over the next couple of weeks. I think Zay Jones falls into that Noah Brown zone where if you really needed to in a deeper league, like a second flex play or whatever else, obvious start play every week. But I think Zay Jones also could be a candidate just a wide receiver 3 or flex leagues kind of this week.
Yeah, you feel no shame whatsoever in starting the guy who just had 14 freaking targets last week, right? 14 targets, right? So he's only 29% rostered. I put him at number 3 on my list, actually ahead of Browning. But obviously, team needs and team situation can vary that a little bit. But yeah, definitely Zay Jones on the radar.
And then our last one, at least, because I had mentioned Zamir White, he made my list. But Deonta Foreman for you went right back to the starting role for the Bears. I can guarantee you in Week 18, if you're still playing your fantasy leagues, Deonta Foreman will murder the Packers defense. But we still have a few ways to go if that's the case. And I'm sorry, a few games, not ways.
Yeah, I mean, I threw him in my top 5 over Zamir White because his role doesn't necessarily seem to be as dependent on an injury, right? Foreman was out there for 56% of snaps, led the backfield in snaps, routes, carries, targets, and yards. He's back from an ankle injury after the Week 13 bye. There were 15 carries. He got 11 of them for 50 yards. Khalil Herbert's down to 17% snap count. I really don't understand that. I thought he looked good early in the year and would be the guy, but that certainly hasn't been the case. And I know Roschon Johnson gets a lot of love in this whole chat.
In the chat, yeah.
Yeah, I started him in my sad stake league team this week. It was him or Tyler Algier. That's what I was going through this week. So I started Roschon Johnson. Obviously didn't work out. Deonta Foreman is the guy there, and he's only 38% rostered because he's coming off an ankle injury after their bye. But yeah, he's back as the lead back. And let's see here. He's got matchups. At Cleveland's tough, obviously. The Cleveland Browns defense is elite, and they're especially elite when they're at home. But then he's got the Cardinals in Week 16, which is a real juicy matchup. And, of course, the Falcons, not a great matchup, 17. And then the Packers, of course, great one to close it out. So that's why I threw Deonta Foreman in my top 5 because the usage is there regardless of the competition.
Real quick, because we'll get to this later on at the end of the show for tight ends. Somebody in the chat's asked about Davis Allen. I had to look up Davis Allen while he was playing. He looked pretty good against the Ravens, but no Tyler Higbee in this contest. Theoretically, he's back next week. That's what the Rams are expecting. And if you look at Jerry Donabini's Snap Chart article, which was talking about these receivers and tight ends, Hunter Long got a lot of workload in the absence of Tyler Higbee. He got injured pretty early on in this Ravens game. To me, Davis Allen is nothing more than like the 3rd or 4th string equivalent at running back. I would not be interested in them whatsoever. And if you are in leagues, like in this person's case, where people are picking up Jimmy Graham, leave said league because that is far too deep and far too dumb to be targeting a Jimmy Graham guy who's got 2 touchdowns in 2 weeks and nothing else otherwise. Like it's a tough spot to be. I understand.
Hey, I started Durham Smythe in Fishbowl a couple times.
Right. Yeah, that's the equivalent of this. Like no, it's not. Like I think Davis Allen.
Hey, who knows? Maybe he's in the Fishbowl playoffs. I think there's 500 left.
Davis Allen falls off of my mind if Tyler Higbee is back or Hunter Long is back, just based on the playing time. But I would encourage you again to look at Jerry Donabinian's article up on RotoWire right now, which does the breakdown on snap shares and kind of goes over more of what I was talking about with Davis Allen.
Yeah, I'll just take a line from that right now. He played 1 snap in the whole first quarter and 91% of snaps thereafter.
Yeah, the chat says, hey, he's more touchdowns than Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts also has 65 million times more receiving yards than Jimmy Graham has too. So difference in fantasy opinion on that. So just a real quick note on Davis Allen. Before we get into the top overall running back pickups and dive into a bit more of the options, let's get a word from our sponsors, Circa Sports. Get ready for the big game and the big game parties at Circa Resort and Casino. Super Sunday, of course, is in Vegas this year. You can watch the big game poolside at Stadium Swim's big game viewing party. Got the massive screen, booming game sound, and of course the view of the pyrotechnic and visual effects throughout the game. Snag the best seat in the sun with day beds, poolside boxes, cabanas, and more. Or touchdown at the world's largest sportsbook, Circa Sports, for the big game bash. 3 stories of football glory featuring a 78 million pixel screen. Book your seat with a variety of reservation options, including bottle service, open bar, and stadium-style food. And then don't miss the legendary viewing experience on February 11th. The big game party is only at Circa Resort and Casino. Reserve today at circalasvegas.com. All right, so we are into the fantasy postseason, Jake. Obviously, for a lot of people, no more bye weeks as well. Thankfully, we are done with that. Although last week, again, Commanders, Cardinals, you're missing Trey McBride, Terry McLaurin. Maybe that's about it. I think there's a case to be made that a few of these matchups in particular, we mentioned it with the quarterbacks earlier, make a team essentially in a bye week or where you wouldn't want to consider a lot of relevant skill options. So there's a lot of streaming candidates and purposes. At running back, you could easily make that case depending on who you picked up. We had talked about Zeke last week, obviously worked out pretty well. Tajay Spears got some work as well this past Monday from a running back.
He was very important on these final drives. It was DeAndre Hopkins and it was Tajay Spears helping them move the ball to get those 2 touchdowns, and that was that. Right? Henry had the work early in that game, but once they got behind 2 scores, Henry has notoriously not performed well from a fantasy perspective when they lose by double digits. The splits there are pretty astounding, and they both actually produced super well in what was an excellent game last night.
Yeah, and buried in the news kind of Friday, and I guess we saw it sort of play out Sunday, Isaiah Pacheco not playing Friday, and of course, Jerick McKinnon, Clyde Edwards-Helaire being very hot waiver wire pickups. I'll be very curious. Andy Reid was very coy in terms of Pacheco's status on Friday when asked if he was going to be placed in injured reserve. They obviously didn't Saturday, but that's not to say Pacheco will play again next week. I kind of like Jerick McKinnon as well in this equation, and certainly possible that you have Clyde Edwards-Helaire if you are looking at running backs. So we mentioned the top guys, of course.
Those guys just outside, one, because they're really close to 50% rostered, and 2, because I think a lot of people think Pacheco might be back, but we don't really know for sure. And, that's a big thing. I mean, McKinnon's 41% rostered. Edwards-Helaire's 50% rostered. I know Edwards-Helaire got a little bit more of the work, but some people like to say like, oh, if he didn't rip his pants on that drive, he was getting the carries. The split might even be more in his favor. But McKinnon is the guy that historically last year was a fantasy playoffs winner.
That's
right?
The Amir Abdullah of an offense that actually needs to have an Amir Abdullah, right? We were saying, that Amir Abdullah can vulture targets from Zamir White. Now, I don't know if that's truly the case, but that's clearly what McKinnon's role is for a team that passes a lot.
Yes, but McKinnon, again, while he's getting less touches, he's getting the more high-value touches. He's getting the touches in the red zone. So if you had to say, hey, pick one to prioritize on the waiver or pick one to pick up, I'm going McKinnon.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll still take Edwards-Helaire. In this equation, if he's available.
If you lost Pacheco in a deep league and you need a replacement, throw in Edwards-Helaire if you miss some of these guys that we discussed earlier.
Yeah, so I want to just be clear because those 2 could still be in the factor. We mentioned Ty Chandler, Chase Brown, and even in my instance, Zamir White. We could kind of rank them however we want, but all 3 have some value. I think same does too for Deonta Foreman. We are now entering the stage where I think Rico Dowdle becomes a guy that I don't really want to play. Cowboys, of course, had their first non-junk time matchup in quite a while and still made it look like junk time, annihilating the Eagles. But Dowdle got the touchdown pretty early into the contest once again. He's very, very valuable if you have Tony Pollard. But I think now with the way I structure, I want to be clear about it because you do this differently, Jake. Yes. The way I structure my roster, I would want to have Dowdle just in the instance that if Pollard were to get injured, this is a top 10 fantasy running back and could help in the playoffs. Yep,
you've established your guy. You want the guys on the top offenses in the league. And we just talked about McKinnon and Edwards-Helaire. You thinking like, oh, high powered offense. Hang on, wait a minute. The Chiefs aren't the Chiefs of last year or the year before. We do need to keep that in mind. I believe Sam Howell has more fantasy points than Patrick Mahomes this year, so please keep that in mind. I think Mahomes he's got like 13 in back-to-back weeks. It's not been pretty for fantasy there. So just remember that whether they're getting whether they're getting jobbed on offsides calls or not, the fantasy production is just not there. But the Cowboys have been an outstanding offense. They are scoring tons of points on whoever they face, and Rico Dowdle, who used to just be the junk time king, suddenly actually had more carries than Tony Pollard in the first half of a game against the Eagles in which they were playing for the 1 seed or for the division. The 49ers are up there at number 1 at the moment here, but he's up to a 30% snap share, and really the first time his production wasn't limited to garbage time. Now I think they'll still run Pollard, as RB1 for as long as he can handle it. But Pollard hasn't broke down yet, so you have to give him credit for that. A lot of us maybe thought they'd sign another back to mix in, or or they would, you just mix things up a little bit. But Dowdle is emerging as that RB2, or I guess I'll call him RB1.5, on that team because, again, he's eating into non-junk time carries, and that's significant. And he's only 10% rostered, which is why I put him on my list outside my top 5, but worth talking about in the running back section here.
Absolutely, and I kind of glossed over this. Maybe we should have doubled back to it. If you recall last week, we had talked about the Commanders' running backs. Brian Robinson had been injured late in that game. Commanders on a bye week last week. Well, now we're going to find out the status of Brian Robinson, but more importantly, what Antonio Gibson and Chris Rodriguez might do. I had said I like Zamir White because the Raiders, sooner rather than later, are going to understand they're not a playoff team. Let's get the guys involved. I don't know if you could apply that same logic to Brian Robinson per se, but the way the Commanders use their running backs, if Robinson were to miss time, right, top 3, top 4 PPR back this season, I think Chris Rodriguez and Antonio Gibson are not just pick up valuable, but could be played in deeper leagues too. And I specifically Rodriguez, who I would imagine has a very low roster rate, especially after buys last week.
Yeah, exactly. Gibson's only at 54%, so he misses our threshold. But you could make a case, depending on when your waivers run and depending on when you see the Commander's first practice report, you could make a case that he's up there dang near the top out of any of these guys. And then Rodriguez, of course, is going to widely be available anywhere. But Rodriguez sits at 0% rostered. You can of course imagine that coming off the bye, he was a deep stash option at best. In last week's show.
If Jacobs gets active to play Thursday, and I'll have already picked up Zamir White in Tuesday and Wednesday leagues, I'll drop him for Rodriguez right away. Like that. Sure. That's how I do that pivot.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Exactly. You just have to react to the information that's available. Fantasy football is a 7-day-a-week sport.
Right. And then I guess one other backup that's not on our show sheet real quick, Dearness Johnson for Jacksonville, still getting a lot of workload behind Travis Etienne. It's the same concept for me when I'm valuing backup running backs that if something were to happen, like Dowdle with Tony Pollard or in the case of Travis Etienne, two guys that get tons of workload in the good offense, Dearness Johnson easily steps in over Tank Bigsby. That's been cleared now for the past month and a half as the starting running back for Jacksonville. Keep that in mind if you are looking at rostering handcuffs. Like Jake, you do the handcuffs. You don't do the 3 defenses like I do, but you have enough handcuffs on your roster if that's the case.
The team that I was playing in the Invitational this week, it was loaded. It was somehow, ETN, Mixon, I don't even remember, but every single starter was a solid. You never have to make a lineup decision because they're solid guys. The guy had started the defense and had 3 defenses on his bench. I've never seen anything like it before. Guess what, guys? He got knocked out of the playoffs. So
it wasn't me. I promise. It was not my team.
By me, who was stashing Ezekiel Elliott, our running back handcuff all year. So just keep that in mind here. But anyway, so if we're gonna do the handcuff thing, Elijah Mitchell, when he's healthy, he's probably the best fantasy handcuff. We could stretch out that argument, but he's definitely one of the top fantasy handcuffs because of the way McCaffrey is used and how much that offense centers around the running game. But of course, Elijah Mitchell was inactive this week with a knee injury, so maybe it's Jordan Mason. I'm thinking about just rostering both Mitchell and Mason in my McCaffrey league because what the heck, make sure I have an RB1 for the fantasy playoffs one way or another. I'm going to do that. And the other note, I had one more running back note because it really surprised me that Keaton Mitchell only checked in at 59% rostered in Yahoo leagues. That is too low. You guys should get out there and fix that. And I wrote down that he took 11 of the 19 running back opportunities, and Gus Edwards had single-digit touches. Of course, Keaton Mitchell only 34% of the snaps. But as we discussed earlier, he makes the most of them. But I don't know, when we used to do this show back in the day, we used to kind of do 60% as the threshold, which is probably a bit too much. We got to keep it to 50. But 59% yesterday, so take a look. Worth typing in, even in your 10-team leagues.
Difficult schedule. That's the only issue rest of the way. Do you play him against Jacksonville? Maybe. It depends what your running back backfield is. I'm not playing in week 16.
I'm actually really excited for my Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers stacks against Jacksonville because that defense against the pass at least has looked super porous.
Yes, and to be clear, Keaton Mitchell should be more involved as a pass catcher. I think that's one of the areas
Mitchell's more like against the screen pass.
I want to get his speed more involved. But that's not really what Lamar Jackson does. That's not what the Ravens do all this time. But Jacksonville this week, pretty good against the run. But next week against the Niners, I'm not playing Keaton Mitchell in that scenario. I'm not playing Gus Edwards. Fantasy finals, you got the Dolphins, but you have 2 weeks to get there. So just something to consider with all those options overall at running back. You have
man,
listed,
I'm wondering what I'm going to do with all my Lamar Jackson shares if I make it to next week. So much Lamar Jackson. I'm going to have to just roll him out
Jake
there
Browning.
against the Niners.
Do what I'm going to do. Play Jake Browning.
I'm pretty sure he's got a bad matchup too, but I haven't looked at it that far.
No, that's not possible. Well, good thing, Jake. We could talk about backup quarterbacks in just a little bit. Sounds like you're in on the Joe Flacco train, as everyone else is. But we'll get to the quarterbacks momentarily.
We got to do the receivers first.
I was going to say, I want to get a word from our sponsors here, also Blue Wire. Okay, we're back, and I had said we're going to talk quarterbacks. We will, I promise. Very invigorating conversation about Tommy DeVito and elsewhere. But let's get to those receivers first. And on our top 5 list, of course, was headlined by Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers, my God.
I know.
Zay
I just
Jones.
mentioned Zay Flowers in a previous.
Yes, yeah. That's you put that one in my ear. That's not me.
Yep. My bad.
Zay Jones, who is going to be more involved as Trevor Lawrence continues to be healthy. That's awesome. Odell Beckham. I mean, he's made an appearance before on our list, but I think now even I feel very confident and safe in saying that I think Odell Beckham rest of the season is an interesting stash if you are looking for more receivers.
So in my Zay Jones notes, I put follow the targets, right? If there's any fantasy football commandment I can preach to any beginner, follow the targets and you'll largely be successful. And Zay Jones had 14 of them. Odell Beckham had 10. That is quite significant.
That's enough.
They're starting to use him as a as a big play guy, and he is showing some ability. I want to say past the eye test, but maybe that's a little bit too generous. He's showing ability to come back and adjust on balls and make plays in space, like as if he is finally healthy. He's had. The last couple of years of his career, it's been injuries and bouncing around teams, then getting re-injured and moving around. Now maybe he's got enough time for, he's built up enough rapport and is healthy enough to make a second late career charge here. He's only 42% rostered. He's still wide receiver 3 based on snaps and routes, this past week. Both Zay Flowers and Nelson Aguilar were there. Rashad Bateman's down to wide receiver 4. But he still caught 4 of his 10 targets. I'll say one more time, for 97 and a touchdown. The roster number is up just based on his name alone, but now he's actually producing, and I could see rostering him. I had seen, I sweep just about every waiver source I can find trying to get all these names, and I kept seeing Odell Beckham come up for the last couple of weeks. I didn't believe it. I apologize if we're too late, but now I believe it.
I'm in on Odell as well, to a certain extent. I think I'd rather have Curtis Samuel, who also makes our list. Commanders were on bye this past week. My thought is the Commanders' defense is so atrocious that they're going to be passing all the time. Sam Howell is as likely to give the ball away as he is to throw a touchdown, which also leads to more passing opportunities and volume. And Curtis Samuel has had a very consistent and reliable role for the Commanders just about all season long. If Brian Robinson were to miss time, we had just talked about earlier, Antonio Gibson and Chris Rodriguez pick up the slack. But we've seen Curtis Samuel utilized as a gadget running back receiver as well, too. I just think there's a safety knowing that he can produce 10 points in a PPR perspective.
Yes.
And he's widely available still.
Yeah, PPR is where you're targeting him because he could easily end up with one of those 8 catches for 30-yard games because we've seen that out of him before. But I had been sitting him on my bench and watching Terry McLaurin put up goose eggs while Samuel gets up 20+ points in consecutive weeks here. So his rostership went down because of the bye week. Now it's down to 35%. You can go ahead and scoop him up. Again, more of a PPR guy, but someone that has major fantasy utility.
Yeah, absolutely. Then there was Tutu Atwell. We mentioned it earlier with Davis, the tight end, and Tyler Higbee and Hunter Long that got injured. But obviously Tutu Atwell injured, I think, in the first quarter of that loss to the Ravens. And
entered concussion protocol, and that meant that pretty much elevated.
Robinson.
Demarcus Robinson to wide receiver 3. What's interesting here is, Demarcus Robinson, we've heard this story kind of before. He's been around the league forever. He has a good game here and there. Everyone picks him up. Then he disappears for a while. So, just fair warning there. But 86% snap share, 98% route share, tied with Kupp for most on the team in the latter category. Also 10 targets. Only caught 3 of them, but one of them was for a touchdown, and he racked up 46 yards. So that's not nothing. And there are formats where that becomes something.
He gets value on NFL teams because he's a pretty good blocker. He, of course, had a couple of famous instances with the Chiefs as well, where he's just a blocking guy who gets a few touchdowns, kind of like what Justin Watson does. And
kind of like what Alan Lazard is.
Well, yeah, that too. Lazard's like a better version. That's like the Culver's version.
He's a better blocker, but a worse touchdown catcher.
He's the Culver's version of that roster space, whereas I think Demarcus Robinson is the McDonald's version. You could get by with it. It's okay, but like it's not nearly as good as Culver's. Again, please sponsor us. No, so Demarcus Robinson certainly someone like even in deeper leagues, it's a little bit tough for me to recommend. I think I'm turning the corner on Quentin Johnston. I wrote about on one of the recent updates that you can see anywhere over 90 yards receiving, mainly off a 57-yard catch. But it was a really good throw by Easton Stick, and I think that's kind of the relevant thing. No Justin Herbert rest of the season.
Yep.
Keenan Allen has already set the franchise record and his career record for most receptions in a season. Let's just say Keenan Allen, we're like, all right, I'm good. No reason to keep putting my body out there on the line any longer.
There is a reason.
Pass catcher.
I need to win our staff dynasty league. That's the reason.
Don't worry, because Joshua Palmer is going to be activated off injured reserve. It seems like possibly ahead of Thursday's contest, which will help. And we have seen Palmer take a lot of the workload ahead of Quentin Johnston, but we might be getting to the point where Johnston still is just getting involved back-to-back games down with 50-plus receiving yards.
Johnston's kind of benefited from a last man standing situation. Yes. 88% snap share this week was significant. He only targeted 4 times, but caught 3 for 91, 72 air yards. That's good. He actually ran one more route than Keenan Allen did, for whatever that's worth. He's definitely had his ups and downs in his rookie campaign, some bad drops, some frustrating mistakes here, but even with the backup quarterback, I mean, it's not like Herbert was playing particularly well either, except for firing the ball to Allen there. So, give it a shot. He's down to 21% rostered, but at least the draft pedigree and the physical skill set is there somewhere.
They aren't mathematically ruled out of the playoffs. The Chargers will not make the playoffs. If you are the Chargers,
there are only 2 teams mathematically ruled out, I think.
Yeah, if you are the Chargers, this season should be about getting Quentin Johnston some confidence, confidence, because otherwise it's been a completely wasted season on all accounts. What has not been a wasted season has been the Texans, although the loss against the Jets this past Sunday certainly hurts their playoff chances. To make things more complicated, we have another receiver injury. 1 week after losing Tank Dell for the rest of the season, Nico Collins leaves immediately after not doing nothing for my fantasy teams with a calf injury. He was ruled out pretty quickly, which is never a good sign, but we don't have a lot of information.
I got so lucky to score 180 points in my Nico Collins league. Thank you to David Njoku, Lamar Jackson, everybody across the board here. But no, this Texans receiver thing, it's like you took 5 guys, a mix of rookies and retreads, threw them in a blender, and who the heck knows what's going to happen, right? Because Tank Dell's out for the year. Nico Collins caught 1 pass on the first drive, exited with a calf injury, and of course had a dud. No wide receiver in that game caught more than 2 passes, and rookie Xavier Hutchinson led the way in snap share with 73%.
Mario and John Staple, I want to add real quick. Xavier Hutchinson was a guy that both Mario and John loved a lot. You know, I'm a disciple of Mario and John. They are like never wrong on the Thursday podcast, and they've been touting Xavier Hutchinson. So just keep that in mind if you are in a super deep league.
I love how our argument is. This guy says he's good. But no, I do believe
John and Mario are always right.
Yes,
I will defer to those guys.
As far as college football guys, college prospects, they are some of the best in the biz. But anyway, Robert Woods, he led the team in route percentage, 82%. He only caught 1 pass for negative yards on 3 targets. Noah Brown had 5 targets and 67% of the snaps, but 0 catches. John Mechie saw 5 targets as well, but just 1 catch for 6 yards on 46% of the snaps, 48% of the snaps. I am not touching this until I might not touch it at all because, right, if CJ Stroud doesn't clear concussion protocol, this offense isn't going to hum along the same way that it has been. And here's what I'm looking at this situation here. I don't really trust any of those guys, but if Nico Collins gets ruled out and CJ Stroud plays, I would be looking to grab Noah Brown, and that's about it.
That's totally fair. And we missed this. We should have got it right away, but Juju Smith-Schuster with a revenge game possibility against the Steelers last week Thursday, of course, goes completely nuclear despite doing literally nothing the entire season rest of the way. I'm not touching Pat's receivers. It's going to be a long-standing thing for me.
You don't think Bailey Zappi has turned the corner?
No, I do not think that has changed anything for me.
I randomly went to the Pete Davidson show in Madison on Thursday night, and at the bar, right before we went into the show, I looked up and I was like, wait a minute. This game hit the over in the first half. What the heck happened here? Was there like defensive touchdown mistakes or something?
No.
Nope. Hunter Henry went off for my dynasty team finally. So anyway, so I don't love Juju, but he did get a 98% snap share and 93% route rate. Remember DeMario Douglas with a concussion and Devontae Parker with a knee injury were both out. If I'm attacking this actually though, I'm still probably looking to get DeMario Pop Douglas instead because I presume he'll be back and he's only 20% rostered here. So that's actually where I'm looking instead of Juju, Devontae, anything, because I think I don't know. Maybe I'm taking small sample sizes in too much of account, but I still think he has the best connection with Zappi, and I think he might be the most talented, young, fresh, ready to roll.
We have gotten more questions about who to start at quarterback than I've seen really at any point during the podcast this entire year.
Season, yep.
Yeah, we'll go into the streaming quarterbacks in a second. Let's get a word from our sponsors here, Splash Sports. RotoWire is a proud partner with Splash Sports for the 2023 fantasy football season. Splash Sports empowers gaming commissioners to earn by creating contests. Commissioners can set up contests at their style and enjoy the evolving Splash Sports platform for customized preferences. From daily to season-long contests, Splash Sports caters to various playing styles such as DFS, Pick X, and traditional Survivor. And unlike traditional sports books, Splash Sports pits you against friends and family, not the house. Splash goes beyond betting, a place where friends and family can connect, strategize, and share in the excitement of sports and sports betting. RotoWire will be running a weekly DFS tier contest on Splash Sports all season long. Can you beat the RotoWire experts? Well, you can just go ahead and enter today. Visit rotowire.com/splash to go ahead and check that out here. Another word from our sponsors, Odds Are. Are you ready to revolutionize your sports betting approach? Begin with a 2-week free trial at oddsr.com, where cutting-edge AI technology sharpens your edge in the betting game. Benefit from our proven 2-year track record, boasting a 60% accuracy rate and an impressive 10% ROI. The Odds Are AI meticulously shifts through extensive data to reveal high-value, green-value plays, guiding you towards smart betting decisions. And it's not just about the numbers. The Odds Are app is exceptionally user-friendly, crafted to be your go-to betting advisor right at your fingertips. Jumpstart your journey to betting smarter and more successfully. Simply visit the iOS or Google Play Store or download Odds Are, ODDSR app, and step into a world of confident betting. Your path to a more strategic betting experience starts with our 2-week free trial. Download today, where smart strategy triumphs over luck. Okay, at quarterback here.
This is a beautiful read, Joe. I got to hand it to you. Just first time with these guys, that was very well read.
I appreciate that. The Splash ones are always tricky because there's a lot of S things overall. And
yeah.
So just
Splash.com/ right?
It can be tough. It can be tough. So that's why we always take our time with those. And, of course, our friends at Odds Are certainly interesting as well, too. And I actually have a pretty comprehensive gambling app tool. There's so many different sports books out there that they have that available to. Just my small plug to talk about. So, quarterback, I had mentioned it, Jake Browning. I think I am going to start Jake Browning over Tua and over Kyler Murray this week. I understand that sounds asinine, but Jake Browning's been good. I don't know how else to say it. Past 2 weeks, confidently looking great. I trust Zach Taylor as a play caller. I trust Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and that offense. And oh, by the way, going against the Vikings team that has struggled all season long, Jake Browning is easily my top streaming quarterback, but he's not the only one. I think Joe Flacco also is a guy that I would play over Tua and Kyler Murray if I had the option. I know I'm pushing something here.
If Tyreek Hill is healthy, I don't think I can sit Tua. Obviously, Tua got a little bit exposed without Tyreek, and the Jets, defense has not been the problem for the Jets, right?
C.J. Stroud. Mm-hmm. I think C.J. Stroud's a better quarterback. I'm not.
Than Tua?
Yes, absolutely.
I think it's way too early to make that statement in both of their careers.
Right now, I think C.J. Stroud is a better quarterback than Tua.
All right.
Tagovailoa is a fine guy, totally great top 10. Stroud is better, absolutely in my mind. Doesn't have Mike McDaniels trying to call plays for him. Doesn't have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and is producing the numbers he is. That's fine. That's not what this conversation is, Jake.
Yes.
I will start Joe Flacco. I'm dead serious. Somebody asked, do you play Flacco or Murray this week? I'm playing Flacco. That's my call.
I could definitely see Flacco over Murray because Murray's got the 49ers.
Yep.
Right? Whereas Flacco, what do I have here? I just had it up a second ago. He's got the Bears. He's got the Bears at home. So as long as weather isn't a factor, and there were even games where weather should have been a factor, like that Rams game, and there were a ton of points scored. So one of my first things when I was doing an actives here, our breaking news editor, Mr. Mike Doria, told me, I made a comment about a cold weather game, in a note, harming someone's fantasy value, and he reminded me that defensive backs slip too. Just like wide receivers do.
True. Yeah,
and that has stuck with me for a while. So I've always been, unless it's a blistering snowstorm where you can't see anything and 60-mile-an-hour winds, little rain, little snow never hurt anybody. So anyway, that's my weather stance this time of the year. But anyway, We touched on Jake Browning a lot. Almost 30 fantasy points in back-to-back games. Both were great matchups. So I think someone mentioned in the chat that that he might have one of the worst schedules rest of the season. I disagree with that. I think Minnesota is a very favorable matchup when a decent quarterback plays them, and I'm not counting Aiden O'Connell in that mix there. At Pittsburgh and at Kansas City, yeah, sure, those are a little bit tougher. Top 11, top 12 defenses, but I'm
not even worried about the Steelers and Chiefs. I thought we saw 2 weeks ago.
Steelers will have. Oddly enough, they're still very much in the playoff hunt.
I mean the Packers exposed the Chiefs defense. Like Jordan Love looked awesome in that game, and didn't look good this Monday night. And I don't think this. I mean, Bailey Zappi just diced up the Steelers defense this past week too. I'm not worried about either one.
Did TJ Watt get hurt or did he come back?
He did, yeah. He was in concussion.
So
they did the classic Jake in high school thing where he wasn't concussed, but then later on actually said he was concussed. So he got to play the whole game despite having to change his visor tint because the lights were too bright. Seems suspicious to you at all, Jake? That happened Thursday. You were enjoying Pete Davidson, and we were debating on if TJ Watt
was a different. It was debatable here, right? He's not quite for everybody if you're unfamiliar with the stand-up.
You chose to go to it.
I took a friend for her birthday. Okay.
All right.
Good. But anyway, back to Joe Flacco and Jake Browning, right?
Yes,
I think we've laughed more now than I did during his hour-long set, but
I would play Joe Flacco over Kyler Murray. I actually feel that confident. Somebody in the chat, and I think this is also worth mentioning, I might have skipped over. If Matthew Stafford is available, I think this is one of those that you pick up Stafford, even if you have no intention of playing him, to block other people from getting quarterbacks. There are way too many matchups this week.
I agree.
Where a top quarterback is going in a dicier one, and Stafford's pretty consistent. I think 20 points fantasy scoring each of the last 3 weeks, or at least close to it. You can reliably play Stafford, and especially in good matchups, he's a very interesting option. I will waste a roster spot making sure somebody else can't play him over a Tua.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Stafford's playing the Commanders, dead last against quarterbacks.
Yes.
Fire it up. He actually makes an interesting case as long as his receivers are healthy throughout the week. So,
otherwise, outside of those quarterbacks, again, Jake Browning and Joe Flacco, I think highlight the guys I would stream for. Derek Carr against the Giants, not doing that after his.
No, he's now up to 3 rib fractures.
Yeah,
right?
No Gardner Minshew for me either. I don't really.
I could roll the dice on him again if I had to.
Yeah, okay. Will Levis is kind of interesting against the Texans. Will Anderson evidently got injured in that game for the Texans. Their stud pass rusher. Not doing Bryce Young. You're playing him next week against the Joe Barry Packer defense. He'll get 300 yards there, no problem. Desmond Ridder against the Panthers is interesting. He had a 25-point fantasy game last week. Does play well at home, like Jeff Coventry talks about in his article.
Yeah, he's on the road, though. I don't know.
Guys like Aiden O'Connell, DeVito.
Yeah, I put all these guys on here just for the heck of it, for some good debate. So here's an interesting dilemma related to quarterbacks, right? In a Superflex league, of course, I'm starting Lamar Jackson. My QB2 or my Superflex spot in the last 2 weeks, it's been very close, within 1 or 2 points, so it hasn't actually cost me. But I've started Zach Moss over Derek Carr and Zach Moss over Will Levis in consecutive weeks here. And again, it hasn't necessarily cost me a ton there, but and then the other one is I could start. It's like Zach Moss, Drake London, Chris Godwin, or a really crappy QB. So that's what I'm sitting at in that super flex spot. And for the last 2 weeks, I've let both Carr and Levis sit.
I think I start Levis this week, but I would be totally fine with Zach Moss in most of the scenarios. And I actually think that's my biggest takeaway from this year in super flex leagues with the amount of injuries that have happened to quarterbacks. Everyone's chasing for these crappy guys, and I think it undermines what is actually some pretty good value and talent that you have.
Yep.
Whether it be the Ty Chandlers or Zamir Whites that you could pick up right now, or like you had the Chris Godwins and Zach Moss.
Let's take an example from this week. You pick up Zay Jones and you have Easton Stick. Who's a better super flex play?
Zay Jones, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with you. On that one.
So yeah, even super flex leagues doesn't have to be a quarterback. That's something that I think we can get comfortable with that idea.
We had discussed Easton Stick a little bit earlier in the show. Again, Herbert done for the rest of the season with that surgery to his finger on his throwing hand. I think it will be Easton Stick the rest of the way. You don't keep this guy on the roster to the extent that they did 5 years now, with only making his second appearance ever last Sunday, without the idea that you want to see what happens if he were to play. Max Duggan, TCU product last year, got him to the college football championship. he is there. He'll be called up, I'd assume. No guarantee he ends up playing, though. Easton Stick, good arm. We saw that in the 57-yard completion to Quentin Johnston. Also a 4.62 40 when he was drafted back in 2019.
Yeah.
I think so. I thought about it this way and I almost put it in the notes, but then I thought we can't write this. A more creative offensive coordinator, I actually think I would pick up Easton Stick. Brandon Staley led Easton Stick is a bottom third quarterback, I think, in the league this year at minimum.
Yeah. So, we'll go with the most recent sample we have, and that was this preseason, right? 44 for 73, 60.2%. Not great, but not terrible. 5.2 yards per attempt, pretty terrible. 1 touchdown, 2 picks. Did have 11 carries for 82 yards. So, there is a little bit of upside there. If you're talking about Easton Stick versus Davis Mills, Nick Mullins, or Mitch Trubisky, the other guys I mentioned in the 2 quarterback league section, then Easton Stick's your guy.
Question for you.
I still don't feel super great about it.
Italians in New York and Joe Buck and Troy Aikman love Tommy DeVito the way they do, which was very evident yesterday. Do the people that love the Forest just get all in on Easton Stick? Because if we're doing last name things and just Easton Stick actually is kind of an interesting name. That's not a good comparison. You didn't like that one? I'm just really bitter from last night. I'm sorry.
I think more of the baseball bat, right?
Oh, Stick, too.
Yeah, no, Easton. Yeah. Well, Easton, right? Easton Stick,
yeah,
right?
Yeah,
a baseball bat, right?
I was really bad at baseball.
I just saw the light bulb go on.
Trying so hard.
I caught the exact moment where the light bulb went on. It was awesome.
That's a bad joke. That's okay. Dad jokes can not always work.
We'll try and do better next week, folks.
There's a lot of questions at quarterback. Can we just answer some of them right now? So this guy asks, do you guys like Goff or Fields more this week? Of course, Fields won that matchup last week when the two played. Goff is at home this go around. And, in the case of Justin Fields, he's got that rushing floor, even though he's been throwing it pretty well. Is there a quarterback favorite of the two in your mind?
Yeah, I'm going to take Goff.
Okay. Goff going against...
Goff going against Denver.
Okay. I don't mind going that direction, but I do understand where somebody could be asking that.
I understand why you might want to play Fields, but once again, the Browns defense is elite, possibly number 1 in the league, and they are even more elite, possibly unbeatable when they are at home. I do not want any part of that matchup. I think the Bears are going to get run out of the building this week.
And then this one feels obvious to me, but just to be clear, Trevor Lawrence against the Ravens or Kyler Murray against the Niners with the 4 points per pass.
Yeah, that's Trevor Lawrence for me.
Yep. Yeah, for me, very, very easy as well, too. So let's dive into the tight ends real quick. Obviously, Isaiah Likely, if you had been able to roster him 2 weeks ago when the Ravens were in a bye, that ended up being really great for you. I was unsure if Isaiah Likely would fill in as the Mark Andrews role. Take another L, Joe, because clearly was the main beneficiary.
A lot of his production came on one huge play that was a complete blown coverage. So,
Yeah, but you had a lot of targets. I mean, that was he was clearly the fill-in. I was absolutely wrong with that, and Isaiah Likely totally fine start.
The problem is the ball's getting spread around to the rest of the wide receivers now too, right?
Yes.
So Flowers, Aguilar, Beckham, and Bateman all had 48% of or greater of snaps and 22 or more routes. Flowers had 45 routes. But Isaiah Likely was actually second with 40 routes, so he's still getting out there. He's still absolutely producing. So he's your man. I believe he's got to be well over the 50% threshold now. He was close to it last week, and but I guess you could still type his name in. He's 55%, so not that much over our threshold. He could be the top tight end pickup option if you're in a shallower league or leagues where a lot of owners have checked out. At this point, because that does happen.
Otherwise, I think it's a difficult tight end situation. So there's Dalton Kincaid. If he were to miss time, Dawson Knox, who just returned off of injured reserve last week, would be really interesting, but it doesn't sound like Kincaid's going to be in that spot. Like he's day-to-day.
Day-to-day with the shoulder injury. 3 targets for Dawson Knox, and the injury for Kincaid didn't happen at the end of the game, so Knox had at least a bit of a role in the offense, with Kincaid around, as was kind of the case earlier in the season before Knox went on IR.
And there's Hunter Henry, got 2 touchdowns on his birthday. That was very predictable, but I would not trust the Patriots to score 2 touchdowns rest of the season, much less this week against the Chiefs. Logan Thomas, of course, the Commanders coming off bye week. I'm just not all that interested. We had an intern, Luke Nemore, who had been asking me about tight ends. He was starting Gerald Everett last week. Don't want to do that with Easton Stick. So I said Tucker Kraft, who quietly has gotten at least 30 receiving yards and 3 catches in each of the last 3 games.
And he broke a tackle and found space on the one play that
I think he looks good. He looks totally competent, but you're not looking for competent at tight end. And I think, unfortunately, if you don't have top 3 or 4, that's all you're going to have. It's a difficult spot to be right now.
Yeah, for sure.
If you're a fading tight end. The streaming defenses real quick. I'll let you go ahead and breeze through those and just gear up any of the questions that we might have yet.
It wasn't the top of the lot of lists I looked at, but my personal pick is probably the Colts. And now, granted, they're 42%, and the defense isn't great, but they're home and they're playing Mitch Trubisky, so that could be, one among the worst quarterback options. And essentially, that's what's happening this week. I'm picking on quarterbacks. I had Las Vegas at number 2. They're only 7% rostered. Of course, they're home against the Chargers with Easton Stick. So, I know we talked about maybe liking Easton Stick, but at the same time, we said start Zay Jones over him in Superflex. So, there's that here. So, and then the Raiders are readily available. Everybody's available, right? Nobody's on a bye anymore. We're finally done with that. Ready to roll. I wrote down Falcons 32% at Carolina. The only thing I don't like is that it is a road matchup, but Bryce Young and the Panthers offense has looked completely incompetent. So
that's my top pickup.
Yeah, a lot of people's top pickup. That's Jerry's top pickup as well. So a lot of people can agree with that across the board. And the Bengals are at home, and they're playing Nick Mullins or Josh Dobbs. But you know what? It might not matter. A team that mustered 3 points against the Raiders last week. Somehow managing to have that wild card spot. It really is amazing, but I think even a mediocre Bengals defense can stick it to these guys, especially if Justin Jefferson doesn't play with the chest injury. Heartbreak there with Jefferson, but he hasn't actually been ruled out yet either, so we could very much see him.
And he actually thinks he's going to play for what it's worth. I don't know if I share that same sentiment, but he seems to be thinking that he's going to play. I would be shocked. Real quick, we have a few questions here. I missed this one from quarterback. So if Stroud is out of these options, who do you like? Levis versus the Texans, Mr. DeVito against the Saints. You could just throw that one out. Flacco against the Bears, or Zach Wilson in his return to the starting lineup against the Dolphins.
Levis is very interesting, but I think I'm actually going Flacco. One, because he is elite, and two, because he has more touchdowns and passes than Kenny Pickett this season. I didn't get to throw that stat out.
Oh my God, that's crazy. It's definitely
I didn't get to throw that stat out in his section, but yeah, it's Flacco to me.
Trey McBride against the Niners or Isaiah Likely against Jacksonville?
I'm throwing out Likely here.
I think I'm playing Likely too, and this is frustrating because I'm probably playing McBride in Stake League because it was one of my many leagues. I
will be playing McBride in multiple leagues, but if I had the Likely option,
McBride was going to be my second flex in Stake League.
Yeah, I know. I have Kelsey. McBride's my flex. That's how this is going.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then you and I are kind of in the same boat. And this guy, Jay Red, just wants to flex in this. I have a buy in PPR. So what should I do just instead? I have buy from these 3 pickups: Zay Jones, Deonta Foreman, or Ty Chandler. I've answered in the chat, but I'm curious if you kind of echo my statement.
I'd actually go Zay Jones because Foreman in that Chicago backfield could have their roles shuffled in a week. We've seen a lot of that moving around this year. And remember that they had a very positive game flow against Detroit. They led that game the entire time. And while Foreman was clearly the lead back this week, I am not sure that sticks in games that they are trailing. And then Ty Chandler, probably good for this week. Again, Madison hasn't been ruled out yet, so we don't know for sure. Because this is, again, I rank these differently in the beginning because we're ranking with this week weighted a lot. This guy has a bye, right? So the long-term outlook is probably Zay Jones for me. With Kirk on IR, you can expect him to get double-digit targets the rest of the season. After this week, Foreman and Chandler could both have very different situations.
I would pick up Ty Chandler in this instance to block the person somebody else getting Ty Chandler.
I'd actually want somebody else to get Ty Chandler in hopes that he has one of those 45-yard games that we discussed. We're trying to 3D chess this whole deal.
I guess. One more question here. Would you rather play James Conner, of course, going against the Niners, over Ty Chandler, Deonta Foreman, or Odell Beckham? I'd assume this is a flex scenario. So James Conner against the Niners, Ty Chandler against the Bengals, Odell against Jacksonville, or Foreman against the Browns.
Man, Admiral Nita, congrats. This is actually a very, very good, difficult, challenging question here. I am probably just going to play James Conner, but I'd be really tempted to sneak Odell Beckham in.
That's the way I was going to go as well, too. I would say follow the over-under. Vegas has that Niners-Cardinals game with a lot of points. If that were to occur, it's because James Conner is at least doing something for the Cardinals. It's not just the Niners
competitive
scoring 45. They could. It's certainly possible. I think Odell is my second one, though. So it's interesting that Ty Chandler was your number one waiver wire pickup, and yet you're saying, no, I would play Odell Beckham over him, too. Maybe we need to recalibrate things.
Yeah, so I didn't actually realize that Beckham was only 47%. until, or 42% when I was making my top 5. So yeah,
Ravens
maybe
match was really
maybe
good
I do need to think about that. But I mean, I would argue that maybe Beckham has more upside, and I'd be shooting for the fences. If I'm in a position where I have to think about those guys, I'm probably projected to lose.
Yeah,
and have to shoot for the stars.
You're right. That's certainly a philosophy. This is not a question, Jake, but I, in my angst today, really empathize with Daniel, who says, in all caps, "Feel so lost. Finished second in my league in scoring, but finished last with 4 wins."
Mm-hmm.
That I don't.
That is why commissioners out there, you pay points, not record. I will be. Your reward for record is a first round bye, and you pay first and second points in the regular season. This is how it should be done. So at least in this case, he should be getting his money back.
Did he try to write a haiku there? "Feels so lost. Finished second in my league in scoring and finished last with 4 wins." I don't know the haiku structure.
Is it in iambic pentameter?
Yeah. The show is officially off the rails, Jake.
Yeah.
We had some Packers moaning. We had some Joe Flacco elite dragon conversation and haikus to end it. I think we're officially at a good point to end the Tuesday edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast, of course, brought to you by Circa Sports. It's week 1 of the playoffs. Hopefully you're with us for at least 2 more. Hopefully you're winning every one of those, and you are like everyone else who's got bye weeks except for me because my team's crap to bed. I'm not bitter. It's fine. We'll be fine next week. We'll be fine more with these waiver wire pickups. Thanks, everyone, for listening.